This was the vacation I had dreamed of, a spontaneous decision to escape the relentless grind of our daily lives, an opportunity to reconnect in a place where time seemed to slow down. The resort was a hidden gem, nestled on a remote island in Florida, its isolation a promise of privacy and undisturbed tranquility. Stefani had been the one to push for this trip. She had been insistent, almost desperate, for a break from our routine. "We need this," she had said more than once, her tone carrying a weight that spoke of unspoken concerns and lingering distance between us. The past few months had been hard, our relationship strained by the demands of work and life. I had been so consumed with my job, often working late into the night, and she had been restless, her dissatisfaction simmering beneath the surface. The trip felt like a lifeline, a chance to find our way back to each other. When we arrived, we were greeted with warm smiles, flower garlands draped around our necks, and cool towels to refresh us after the long journey. The air was thick with the scent of tropical flowers, mingling with the salty sea breeze, and as I looked around, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Maybe this was exactly what we needed. Our suite was nothing short of spectacular. Stefani was practically buzzing with excitement as she explored every corner, her eyes wide with wonder. The room was expansive, with floor-to-ceiling windows that opened onto a private terrace. Beyond that, a plunge pool shimmered in the sunlight, the ocean stretching out endlessly in the distance. The decor was tasteful, a blend of modern luxury and island charm, with soft linens, dark wood, and splashes of vibrant color. Stefani twirled around in the sunlight streaming through the windows, her smile radiant. "This is perfect," she exclaimed, her laughter filling the room. It was a sound I hadn't heard in a while, and it warmed something inside me that I hadn't realized had grown cold. The first few days were blissful. We slipped into a leisurely routine, our time spent lounging by the pool, sipping on cocktails brought to us by attentive staff, and indulging in gourmet dinners under the stars. The resort's restaurant was a masterpiece, with dishes that were as beautiful as they were delicious. We dined on fresh seafood, exotic fruits, and delicate pastries, each meal a celebration of the island's bounty. Our conversations, once stilted and strained, began to flow with ease. We laughed, we teased, and we shared stories from our past, reminiscing about the early days of our relationship when everything had felt so effortless. It was as if we were rediscovering each other, peeling back the layers that had accumulated over the years, and finding the people we had fallen in love with. On the fourth day, as we were having breakfast on our terrace, Stefani mentioned that she wanted to visit the resort spa. "I've heard they have this incredible seaweed wrap that's supposed to be rejuvenating," she said, her eyes shining with anticipation. "Why don't you come with me?" I smiled, reaching across the table to take her hand. "You go ahead," I told her, squeezing her fingers gently. "I think I'll just relax by the pool with a book. You know, I'm not really a spa person." She pouted playfully, but there was a flicker of something else in her eyes, something I couldn't quite place. "Are you sure? It could be fun." I shook my head, laughing softly. "I'm sure. Enjoy yourself, Stefani. You deserve it." She leaned over to kiss me on the forehead, her lips lingering a moment longer than usual. "I won't be long," she promised, her voice soft, almost tender. As she walked away, I watched her go, a small smile playing on my lips. But as she disappeared into the resort, a strange feeling settled in my chest. I couldn't quite shake it, but I brushed it off, telling myself that everything was fine. After all, this was our perfect getaway. Nothing could go wrong here. As the afternoon sun began its slow descent, casting elongated shadows across the resort, I found myself growing increasingly restless. What had started as a serene day by the pool had turned into something unsettling. The book I had been reading now lay forgotten on the lounge chair beside me, the words blurring together, unable to hold my attention. A gnawing feeling in my gut told me that something was off. I glanced at my watch and was surprised to see that nearly 3 hours had passed since Stefani had left for the spa. It seemed unusual, especially since she had assured me she wouldn't be long. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was enjoying herself so much that she decided to indulge in additional treatments. But the uneasy feeling persisted, nagging at me until I couldn't ignore it any longer. Deciding to check on her, I rose from my chair and made my way towards the spa, the soft sand crunching under my feet. The path was lined with lush greenery, the sweet fragrance of hibiscus flowers filling the air, but the beauty of the surroundings did little to calm my growing unease. As I neared the spa, a flash of movement caught my eye. I paused, squinting against the sunlight, and my heart skipped a beat when I saw a familiar figure in the distance. It was Stefani, her distinctive silhouette unmistakable even from afar. But something was wrong. She wasn't coming from the direction of the spa. Instead, she was walking away from it, her steps hurried and purposeful. Confusion clouded my thoughts as I watched her. Where was she going? And why hadn't she returned to our suite after her spa session? A myriad of questions swirled in my mind, but no answers came. Instinctively, I decided to follow her, keeping a safe distance so as not to be noticed. Stefani's pace quickened as she moved further away from the main resort area, her footsteps leading her towards the beach. I stayed behind, using the dense foliage as cover, my heart pounding in my chest. The once tranquil island now felt ominous, the peaceful silence broken only by the sound of waves gently lapping against the shore. As she continued, she veered off the main path and towards a secluded area of the beach where the resort's private cabanas were nestled among the palm trees. These cabanas were meant for guests seeking extra privacy, often used by honeymooners or those wanting to escape the busier parts of the resort. But what was Stefani doing here alone? I hesitated for a moment, my mind racing with possibilities. Was she planning a surprise for me? Or was there something more sinister at play? The unsettling feeling in my gut intensified, but I pushed it aside, determined to find out the truth. I crept closer, the soft sand muffling my footsteps, until I had a clear view of the cabana she was heading towards. I could see her now, clearly. She stopped at the entrance, glancing around as if to ensure she wasn't being followed, and then slipped inside. My heart pounded against my ribcage, each beat echoing in my ears. I had never felt so conflicted. Part of me wanted to turn back, to pretend I hadn't seen anything and avoid whatever truth was waiting for me inside that cabana. But another part of me, the part driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, urged me forward. I moved closer, careful to remain out of sight. The cabana's curtains were partially drawn, allowing a sliver of sunlight to stream in and cast long shadows on the sand. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever I might find. Moments later, the unmistakable sound of laughter drifted through the air, a man's laughter that made my breath catch in my throat. The voice was unmistakable. It was Randy, my best friend. Randy had been invited on this vacation as a gesture of goodwill, a chance to lift his spirits after his recent breakup. I had hoped the trip would be a distraction for him, a way to ease his pain, but now it felt like a cruel twist of fate. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine he would betray me like this, especially with Stefani. I moved cautiously, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they would hear it. The lush vegetation concealed my approach as I inched closer to the cabana. The sound of their conversation grew louder, mingling with the distant murmur of the ocean. I positioned myself by a small gap in the curtain, bracing myself for what I was about to see. But before I could process the full extent of my emotions, Stefani's voice cut through the air, her words sharp and mocking. "I knew he wouldn't suspect a thing," she said with a smirk, pulling away from Randy just long enough to glance towards the cabana's entrance, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. It was in that moment that the last remnants of doubt and hope shattered, leaving me with only one clear thought. I had to act, and I had to act now. As I peered through, the world around me seemed to collapse. Inside the cabana, Stefani was on her knees before Randy. Her hands moved with a practiced ease that made my stomach churn. The scene was one of intimate betrayal, each gesture more heart-wrenching than the last. "Babe, your friend's Johnson is really tasty," Stefani purred, her voice laced with lust. "Made me more horny than I've ever been." The words were a punch to the gut. My mind reeled, struggling to process the brutal reality of the situation. Randy's reaction was even more infuriating. He laughed, a low, mocking sound that resonated with an air of casual disregard. "Oh, Kamion man," he said with a smirk, his tone taunting. "Don't you have any manners? Get the hell out." It was as if time had frozen in that moment, my vision blurring with a combination of shock and rage. The betrayal I had felt in recent months, the frustrations from our strained relationship, and the overwhelming sense of being deceived all converged into an explosive torrent of anger. I had been trying to rebuild what was lost, but now it felt like everything had come crashing down in an instant. Without fully realizing what I was doing, my anger propelled me forward. My hands clenched into fists, and I stormed into the cabana, the curtains parting with a forceful swipe. The scene before me seemed to freeze as both Stefani and Randy turned to face me, their expressions a mix of shock and guilt. Stefani's eyes widened, her face paling as she scrambled to her feet. "What are you doing here?" she stammered, her voice faltering. Randy, still seated, looked up with a smirk that barely concealed his surprise. "Whoa, buddy," he said, trying to play it cool. "Didn't expect to see you here." The sight of Randy's nonchalance only fueled the fire inside me. I felt a surge of adrenaline, my body trembling with the force of my rage. "How could you both do this?" I shouted, my voice trembling with a mix of pain and anger. "After everything we've been through, this is how you repay my trust?" Stefani opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She looked helpless, her eyes darting between Randy and me. The sheer betrayal on her face was almost too much to bear. Randy's attempt at casual indifference only enraged me further. "Look, man," he said with a shrug, "I didn't think it'd be a big deal. We're just having a good time." The flippant tone of Randy's voice was like a slap in the face. My fists clenched tighter, my vision narrowing as I took a step toward him. "A good time? I see that. You think this is a joke?" I didn't give him a chance to respond. My fury exploded in a burst of physicality. I lunged at him, the anger coursing through me, finding an outlet in the rough contact. Randy's surprised yelp was swallowed by the sound of our struggle. The scene quickly descended into chaos as I grappled with him, the echoes of my betrayal reverberating through the cabana's walls. Stefani's cries of protest were drowned out by the noise. My vision was a red haze of anger and betrayal, every punch I landed fueled by the depth of my hurt. It was only when Randy's defensive attempts grew weaker and his laughter was replaced by pained groans that I finally began to regain my senses. The reality of what I had done began to sink in, but the hurt was still raw and the damage was irreparable. In the silence that followed, as Randy lay on the floor with a swollen face and broken teeth, I realized that our perfect getaway had unraveled into something far more sinister. Randy barely had time to react before my fist connected with his face. The impact was brutal, a shockwave of violence that reverberated through my body as his head snapped back. The satisfying crunch of bone was a harsh confirmation of the damage I had inflicted. Randy let out a guttural howl of pain, his hands flying to his mouth, but the blood that began to pool between his fingers told me I had shattered his teeth beyond repair. The sound of his suffering was almost drowned out by Stefani's scream. She stumbled backward, her face drained of color, eyes wide with shock and horror. The woman I had once cherished, the person who had promised me forever, was now a symbol of betrayal. Her presence only intensified the storm of emotions raging inside me. I turned to her, my voice low and seething with anger. How could you do this?" I snarled, each word dripping with hurt and fury. The hurt was like a searing flame, consuming any remnants of the love and trust one had once held for her. Stefani opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her eyes were locked onto mine, filled with a mix of fear and shame. The silence between us was thick with unspoken regrets and broken promises. My anger was still boiling, and the need to assert control, to make them both feel the weight of their betrayal, was overwhelming. With a sense of grim determination, I raised my hand and slapped her across the face. The sound of the impact was sharp and brutal, echoing through the small space of the cabana. Stefani's head whipped to the side, and she crumpled to the floor, gasping for air. Her cheeks flushed red from the force of the blow, and tears began to spill down her face as she looked up at me, her expression a mixture of stunned disbelief and raw fear. The sight of her on the ground, her once proud demeanor now reduced to a crumpled heap of shame, was a cruel mirror of the way I felt inside. I was a whirlwind of emotions, anger, betrayal, a deep, gnawing hurt. But amidst the chaos of my feelings, a cold clarity emerged. This wasn't just about reacting to their betrayal. It was about reclaiming control and making them understand the depth of their actions. I paced the small confines of the cabana, my breathing ragged, each step a testament to the whirlwind of rage that had taken over me. Randy was still groaning on the floor, his hands clutching his ruined mouth, the blood seeping through his fingers like a grim reminder of my fury. Stefani was on her knees, her tears falling freely, her face a mask of regret and fear. "Look at you both," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and sorrow. "You thought you could play with my life, my trust, and not face the consequences?" The words felt hollow, inadequate against the backdrop of the betrayal and pain that had erupted in this once beautiful place. Stefani tried to rise, her movements shaky as she reached out to me. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I never meant for any of this to happen." But her apologies fell on deaf ears. The damage was done, and the depth of her betrayal was something that could not be undone with mere words. I looked at her, my expression hardened, and then turned my gaze back to Randy. "You think a few broken teeth will make things right?" I spat, my anger still raw. "You think this is some sort of twisted joke?" Randy tried to push himself up, but the pain was evident in his struggles. He started, but the words were choked off by a fresh wave of agony. I was done listening. The sense of betrayal was too deep, the need for immediate revenge too strong. I turned back to Stefani, who was now trying to stand, her eyes pleading. "You both need to understand that this isn't just about what you did," I said, my voice cold and unyielding. "It's about how you've made me feel, how you've shattered everything we had." As the weight of my words settled over them, I knew this was just the beginning. The immediate revenge was only the start of a much larger reckoning. The betrayal had set off a chain of events that would forever alter the course of our lives. The calm, idyllic getaway we had envisioned had turned into a battleground of broken trust and shattered hearts. The cabana, once a symbol of luxury and relaxation, was now a grim testament to shattered trust and raw violence. Torn fabric lay scattered across the floor, mingling with the remnants of broken dreams and the echoes of harsh words. Randy was still curled on the floor, groaning in pain, his hands clutched protectively over his battered face. His eyes, wide with terror, darted around as if seeking an escape from the consequences of his actions. Stefani, meanwhile, was a portrait of devastation. She stood trembling, her tears carving silent trails down her cheeks, her entire body shaking with the weight of her realization. The gravity of what had just transpired was settling in, and she looked utterly lost, her face a canvas of regret and fear. Without another word, I turned on my heel and walked out of the cabana. The fury I had felt moments ago had cooled into a steely resolve. No longer was I driven by the blind rage of the moment. Now, I was consumed by a cold, calculated determination. The betrayal had ignited a resolve within me that would ensure no part of my life remained untouched by the fallout. I made my way back to our suite with a sense of grim efficiency. The luxurious surroundings that had once represented our ideal escape now felt like a prison. I moved quickly, methodically packing my bags. Every item I folded, every piece of clothing I placed into my suitcase, felt like a step towards reclaiming control. The marriage, the friendship, both were irrevocably shattered. There was no turning back from this point. As I packed, my mind was already racing through the next steps. I had to make sure that Stefani and Randy felt the full weight of their betrayal. This wasn't just about a physical confrontation. It was about dismantling the carefully constructed lives they had enjoyed at my expense. I had been quietly gathering evidence of their affair for weeks, ever since the first whispers of suspicion had crept into my mind. I knew something was off, and my suspicions were confirmed when I found the hidden texts, bank statements, and emails that linked Stefani and Randy in a way I had never imagined. The evidence was damning, and it was time to use it. As I finished packing, I grabbed my phone and made a series of calculated calls. First, I reached out to Randy's business partners. The conversation was terse but effective. I explained, in vague terms, that Randy's recent behavior had been unprofessional and unethical. I carefully avoided specifics, ensuring that the partners would be compelled to investigate further without implicating myself directly. Next, I called our mutual friends. The betrayal had to be known, not just to satisfy my own sense of justice, but to ensure that the social circle they had once enjoyed would become an uncomfortable reminder of their actions. I provided them with a detailed account of what had transpired, making sure that the story was compelling enough to ensure that the gossip would spread quickly. Lastly, I contacted my lawyer. The process of initiating a divorce was more than just a formality. It was a declaration of the end of a chapter that had once been filled with promise. I was meticulous in my instructions, outlining how I wanted the divorce to proceed. My aim was clear. I wanted Stefani to feel the repercussions of her actions, to ensure that her newfound relationship with Randy didn't come with any of the comforts or securities she had previously enjoyed. With the calls made and the arrangements set, I took one last look around the suite. The pristine surroundings, the luxurious details, they all seemed tainted now, a mockery of the ideals I had once held dear. As I walked out of the suite and into the evening light, a part of me felt a grim satisfaction. The immediate revenge had been swift and decisive, but the true fallout was just beginning. The resort, with its golden sunsets and serene waters, was no longer a paradise but a battleground where trust had been shattered and lives irrevocably altered. As I drove away, leaving behind the memories of a once perfect getaway, I knew that the consequences of this betrayal would ripple through our lives, changing everything in their wake. The days following the explosive confrontation at the resort unfolded into a relentless blur of legal battles and strategic maneuvers. Stefani's attempts to reach me were constant, a cacophony of texts and voicemails that ranged from tearful apologies to desperate pleas for reconciliation. Each message was a reminder of the shattered trust and broken promises. I ignored them all with a resolve that had hardened into steel. My focus was singular, dismantling the life we had built together. Stefani's efforts to salvage her life were met with increasing despair. The divorce proceedings, though swift, were ruthlessly efficient. My lawyer had meticulously documented every piece of evidence, emails, texts, and financial transactions that exposed the affair and the extent of the betrayal. The courtroom drama was minimal. The facts spoke for themselves. Stefani was left with nothing but the clothes on her back, the lavish lifestyle she had once enjoyed now a distant memory. The judge had been unsympathetic, and the legal outcome was as harsh as it was fair. Stefani's attempts to fight the divorce were futile. The evidence was irrefutable, and the legal machinery moved swiftly. She was forced to accept the terms, her life unraveling with every legal document signed and every asset divided. The luxury and security she had taken for granted were now stripped away, leaving her with nothing but a hollow echo of her former life. Randy, on the other hand, faced a more public collapse. His business, once a symbol of success, crumbled under the weight of scandal. His partners, previously loyal, had turned against him with a vengeance. The loss of contracts, clients, and ultimately, his company was a crushing blow. The last reports I received painted a bleak picture. Randy was embroiled in lawsuits that threatened to bankrupt him. His reputation was tarnished beyond repair, and the once esteemed entrepreneur was now a cautionary tale of hubris and betrayal. As the dust settled, I found myself in a place of eerie calm. The satisfaction of having taken decisive action against those who had wronged me was tempered by the ongoing pain of betrayal. I packed up my life and relocated to a new city, a fresh start far away from the shadows of my past. The transition was not without its challenges, but it offered the promise of new beginnings. The pain of the past lingered, a ghost that occasionally surfaced, but it no longer dictated my every waking moment. I channeled my energy into my work, immersing myself in new projects and opportunities. The satisfaction of building something from scratch, of creating new successes in the wake of personal devastation, became my refuge. I poured my heart into every task, finding solace and purpose in the achievements that lay ahead. Meanwhile, Stefani and Randy's attempt at a new life together was doomed from the start. Their relationship, built on a foundation of deceit and betrayal, could not withstand the pressures of reality. Reports indicated that their efforts to forge a future together were fraught with difficulties. They were both shadows of their former selves, struggling to cope with the aftermath of their choices. The illusion of happiness they had once sought was now a cruel reminder of their actions. The journey was far from over, but as I looked ahead, I felt a sense of liberation. The chains of betrayal had been broken, and with them, the power they had once held over me. I was free to embrace whatever the future held, unburdened by the ghosts of the past. And in that freedom, I found the strength to move forward, to build a new life, and to find contentment in the process of healing and renewal.